Good morning, everyone. My name is Viji, and I am an Ayurvedic practitioner and a Jyotiṣa, and I have a healthcare practice called Divine Journey. And every first Sunday or one Sunday a month, I do this chai with Viji where I talk about various topics that, hopefully will be important and relevant and helpful to our lives. And it's just an opportunity for all of us to gather together in community, learn from each other, and support one another. So today's chai is a culmination of both April and May's chais with Viji, where I discussed how the concept of relationship begins before birth itself. And that puts a lot of, interesting thoughts with us about what we can do and how relationships are formed. And then the next month, we talked about how those relationships come with inherited patterns, and how, when we are aware of what those patterns are, we can infuse a sense of agency to potentially transform, change, and mitigate some of the things that come up with relationships that may cause us some dissonance. And today I wanted to really step in some ways away from the technicalities of Ayurveda and Jyotish, although if any of you have any questions, we can talk about it, and talk about the lived experience of relational karma. That means, how do we experience these inherited patterns that we gain when we are born, and how in real life, as we go through relationships, not only with our parents, but in other relationships in our lives, how do we live through them, and how to understand how we react and interact with those relationships can actually change when we bring in that awareness and then conscious choice. So today, I want to begin, for us who either did not attend the chais, or just need a little bit more review, on discussing how these inherited patterns come about. And then from there, how we experience these inherited patterns. And I'm going to go over a real life scenario between a mother and daughter. And then talk about how that awareness can actually change the way we participate in those relationships, and how these learnings can actually be used across many different relationships that we have. So before we look, right, at how relational patterns influence us later on in life, we have to first understand that we begin our first relational environment in the womb itself. And that's why Ayurveda emphasizes so much about practices that we do before we get pregnant and while we are pregnant, because that womb environment influences the relationship that we create with our creation, and in this case, a child. So from that first relational environment comes then birth. And birth then begins the unfolding of that karma that we talked about last time. And that arises from these two charts that we talked about, very specifically, the last two chais, the D7 and D12. So D12 is about the inherited karma, the ancestral lineage, and the lessons that we are here to learn from that ancestral lineage, what is kind of brought down. That's shown in the D12 chart. And then the D7 chart shows the relational tone that we have with our creation, and in this case, between a mother and a child, as well as, the father, the parent. And in addition to that, that relational tone obviously is going to impact how we interact with the relationships around us. So so birth actually then gives rise to that lived relational karma. But this obviously doesn't just end at birth, it also then goes when we come into adulthood. So when you see here now this child who has grown up and is in relation with her parents, each one of these individuals carry a D7, right? Or a D12. the father, and then the child. So where we experience where we experience the feelings of our relationship is in these spaces of overlap. And this is really powerful and yet at the same time extremely complicated because if you think about it, you're superimposing different karmas and different emotional, relational ways in which people interact with each other, at least in this one particular unit, three different individuals. And so this is very important, to understand. Any thoughts that anyone has before I move forward? So on the previous slide, you saw that, part of the experience that we have of our relationships comes from that overlap, right? And obviously, we have to understand that the overlap and the relational fields that we all have come from something that is inherited. So it's not random, right? And now the thing is that when that relational overlap in some way, shape, or form doesn't match, there's a mismatch, that's when dissonance arises. So, for example, right, when each person has their own unique experience of a circumstance, of a relationship. And, one person can feel one way, they can feel that like a caring tone. One can feel pressure from that very same tone, or one might feel urgency, whereas another person might feel space. It's that understanding initially how different relational fields can come into contact with each other that helps us to begin to understand why we may experience dissonance, disappointment, sadness, anger, upset at the interactions that we have. And let me step back a little bit. Today's conversation, right, is about understanding the fact that how and why these kind of relational dissonances occur. In my work, when I work with women, all the time, depending on, for example, when they come to me, whether it's before they want to get pregnant, whether they're pregnant, I often find it, almost non-surprising now that everyone has a background of, oh, this is going on with my mother. This is going on with my parents. I'm having this issue with a colleague. I'm having this issue with my boss. But there's a lot of emotional tension, emotional environment that is surrounding them that obviously impacts how they think, how they feel, how they carry themselves. And if we go back to that first slide, these emotions, these feelings impact our very own creation. So think about it that, for example, we are trying to make a cake and we can get the same ingredients from two different places. We can get one from the garbage that someone threw away. We can get another set of the same ingredients from a store, an organic store that's curated, that's consciously made. And at the end of the day, the creation will be the same. We will have, both individuals or both cakes are going to be the same. There'll be a cake. But obviously, the nature of that cake is going to be different depending upon what influenced the entire making of that cake. Likewise, in our own lives and in our own creations, it is important to understand what goes into it. So I think the biggest issue that we have in life is how to manage the relationships that we're in, because it can either cause us joy or either cause us pain. And we bring this feeling, we bring this emotion, we bring these thoughts into every other thing in our lives. So this is why this is very important. And as we go through the presentation, I'd love to hear your own experiences and your own thoughts. But the idea is not to erase, right, that dissonance, because there is a reason why, these kind of patterns and experiences exist. But the idea is that as we create more awareness, then we create the space to be able to potentially not only understand based on that awareness, but create a different response, which will then, as all of this is cyclical, create a different experience for us. Okay, so let's start with this example of a mother and daughter. Okay. And so the daughter comes back, from work, and she's feeling a little bit like overwhelmed and, really had a difficult day. And so then the mother is like, oh, okay, well, what happened? And out of care, obviously, she asks her daughter. And then immediately like the daughter's like, well, I'm just not ready to talk about it right now. So I just need a little bit of space. And probably because she hasn't processed her own experiences of the day. Well, what ends up happening is that in this particular case, the mother is probably feeling rejected because she's trying to connect with her daughter, ask her how she's doing, but the daughter experiences it a bit differently. And we can actually superimpose this very example on so many other and different types of relationships and experiences that we may have. But this is us looking outside in and noticing this interaction. So the interesting thing here, right, is that we have the same relationship that the mother and daughter are in. However, they experience it differently. So we've got the mom saying and really just feeling like she wants to be so close to her child, and she doesn't understand why her daughter is asking for space or sometimes feels like she pushes her away. And so then she begins to question, am I pushing too hard? Am I not doing the right thing? Because really all I want is, to care for her and to show her that I'm supporting her. And so there is a sense of almost like I have so much feelings and care for my daughter, I don't think she realizes. And then there's a subsequent kind of disillusion of her thoughts that I really just miss having that connection with her. And now then we look at the daughter's side. So the daughter is like, man, no matter what I do, it's not enough. I really want the connection with my mom, but sometimes I just feel smothered and I just can't have a moment to myself to think, to process. And she really feels, wow, I just wish that she could see who I really am. And I don't think she does see me. And why does spending time with her just feel so tiring and so exhausting? That's why naturally I pull myself away just because I need to have that space to create some safety and peace for myself. And it's obviously certainly not to hurt her. And so I understand that she means well, but it feels like pressure and not support. I don't know about any of you, but I mean, as a practitioner, but also as a human being in relationships herself, see and experience this all the time. And, we're having a very unique look at this because it's on a screen and we're looking at somebody that isn't ourselves. But really, this is sharing how, two people in the exact same relationship with really the best of intentions experience it so differently. So, bringing in the context of what we spoke about in the last two chais about our inherited karma and why we experience things a certain way, I want to, talk about the experience of the mother and the daughter from that perspective. But before I share that, I want to share with you one thing, and that is that many of you who did not come to the previous chais or don't have any experience in Jyotish, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because we experience these things irrespective of whether we know where they're coming from. It's just that if we do know, it helps us to kind of separate from taking things personally, right? And I think that that's very important because oftentimes we react because we take things personally. So in this particular case, the mother had a an ancestral karma of Yama. And you guys can go back to the previous chais, but I will describe a little bit about what this ancestral heritage is about. And then her relational tone, the way that she relates in a relationship, is this Ikshu Rasa or sugarcane juice. So let's talk about, first of all, the ancestral karma. So with Yama, Yama is about responsibility. It's about structure, it's about control, it's about maintaining things that the way that they are, right? And so that you have a sense of what that is and you feel comfortable, and that's what makes you actually feel comfortable. So in the case of her relationship with her daughter, any distance at all can feel destabilizing. And so it feels like, wait a minute, something's not right, something's out of alignment here. And so that's very troubling to somebody who has this ancestral karma and kind of it's like the blood that runs through your veins, the way of experiencing something, right? And again, this is no fault of her own. This is just the way that she's wired. And the thing is, so now let's look at the other side of the emotional tone. So this is the Ikshu Rasa or sugarcane. So if any of you remember from last time, when this type of relational karma or relational tone, sugarcane juice, requires a lot of effort to get, at the end, that sugarcane juice, which is very sweet. So for her, the mother, whenever she experiences a sense of distance, she's like, okay, I need to try. I need to put forth effort. I need to actively do something to maintain that connection between myself and my daughter. So it's moving towards that closeness that allows her to feel that she is doing something to repair the relationship. Now, the biggest takeaway is in here is like, okay, so this is how that mother experiences and feels that relationship and how she naturally approaches the relationship. And again, this is not something, at least at this point in time, as we're seeing, that she decided to do, but this is just the way that, this is a pattern, a way of being that she has inherited, that she was born with. Now, Now let's go to how the daughter experiences the interaction in the same way. The daughter comes from a different lineage. And when I say different lineage, it's more that there is a same lineage, of course, but different lessons from that lineage to learn. But these are all shown in each and every one of our charts. So that's why it's so fascinating to be able to learn from Jyotish, because you can see these kind of things. So in this case, the daughter comes from this Sarpa lineage. And for for that lineage, there's a lot of feelings and way of being around going inward, right? Being slightly guarded, being protective, because Sarpa comes from the lineage of the serpents, where, the serpents are very protective. They're coiled, they're inwards. And also, a part of Sarpa lineage is to forge one's own path. So there is a tendency then for the daughter naturally to withdraw, to conserve energy, and she needs time to be able to process what she is going through, what she's thinking. And so that's that part of her karma. And on the other side, with relation to interactions with her mom or that relational tone, is that she needs time for things to settle, right? And so, it requires a bit of effort. It requires doing something, let it settle, then going on to the next step, then letting it settle, then going on to the next step. Exactly how, for example, yogurt or dadi is made. So, it takes a bit of steadiness and pacing. And you can see here that the idea of love is expressed in these different ways. And so whereas the mother wants to go closer to her, right? For her, love is experienced more of there's a reliability, and I know that, and I have that connection, but I don't have to outwardly show it, right? And it takes me a little bit of time also to kind of demonstrate that connection, but a little bit or a lot different than my mom. And by the way, again, those of you who are interested, each one of these, D12 lineages has a story, right? And so when you understand the story behind them, then you can understand how these ancestral inheritances manifest within your own life, or can manifest in your own life. So now we come to this kind of like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Because in real time, we have this kind of back and forth karma that takes place. So the mother moves in to her daughter to feel closer and to feel safer for herself. But the daughter, as an Ahi Sarpa person and one who takes a little bit of time, then begins to immediately view that mother's approach as pressure, and then starts to interpret it from that perspective. And so she takes that as pressure, and then she starts to move away to create that same safety within her. And so for her, needs to go internal and needs to think about things before she, engages or shares or anything like that. Now, so then we have that response of the daughter, which is moving away. And then we have the mother who comes from this other wiring, if you will. And she experiences the actions of her daughter as disconnection, as distance. And again, then she moves, her natural response is to move toward her daughter to get closer and to restore connection. And that is how she feels a sense of control over the situation, a sense of groundedness, and a sense of reassurance. But the interesting thing here is each person's attempt to create safety for themselves and to actually maintain that connection unintentionally activates the other person. And all of this is about our own nervous systems, right? Engaging in the ability to create safety for ourselves, but both people in the relationship do it in opposite ways. Any thoughts? Because I think this is absolutely fascinating. Any thoughts that people have? Any reactions?
Yeah, Viji, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name's Lynn Lee. I'm actually a midwife of 45 years, too long, but there you go. It's fascinating what you're talking about because number one, being a giver to women and assisting them in birth from that very first slide, um, it's really incredible to, and my own personal history, which I don't mind sharing. There's no doubt I was separated from my mother at the
Right.
age of 6 weeks, and many years later, at the age of 60, I found my birth family. So I knew nothing, very little about my family, but that connection with the mother is incredible. So as time went by, my connection with this new family that I found, I became very close to the youngest sister. So there were 7 children. I was number 5. I'm the one she gave away. And it was so crazy that even to this very day, my sister and I say, "Oh my God, Lynn, you're so much like my mum. Oh my God, you're like our mum." Da, 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 da. And I didn't know it. I have features about me that come up to my Sarah, my young sister, that say, "Oh my God, that's just how mum would have reacted." And so clearly that's a very cool thing to understand. And I never grew up with her. I didn't know my mother. So it's so enlightening that what you're describing and talking about comes from something that I didn't know anything about, right? But the other piece I've lived is the daughter-mother relationship, exactly what you're describing. And you know it, Viji, you know everything I've been through. And this in itself, but I had a different way of reacting from this mother.
Of
So
course.
yeah, and so my question to you comes from a sensitivity perspective. And that's D12, D7 stuff, isn't it? Because some of us are more sensitive than others. And this feeling of, oh, rejection, all of that. And of course, being rejected as a baby myself, I have that within me.
Correct.
And so in order, and when my daughter finally left, because she was, saying to me, "Oh, Mum, I found a boyfriend, and guess what? He's 46." And I said, "Absolutely not." And she was 25. I said, "No, no, no, don't bring him here. I don't want to meet him. Do not bring him to my house. No, 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 no. It's not happening." And the books tell me, don't do that. I knew that that wasn't the way to deal with this, but my inner perspective was, absolutely not. She needs to know this. And 2 weeks later, she left home. And when she left, the feeling of rejection was huge because I'm a very empath. I'm empathic and I'm so sensitive. And so I had to go within myself, and I talked to people like Viji and my therapist and all these people that I work with. And it was about paying attention to connection. It didn't
Yes.
matter. It's so, so important. Doesn't matter how you keep connected. And I would text her. I constantly text her. And that was in the April. And finally, in the July, she invited me for lunch. And I went for lunch in the park in San Francisco, and we connected and we talked. And the connection with that man had gone, thank goodness, or at least dispersed, and it was all just chatting occasionally, thank goodness. But she and I, she's 29 now, and we have the best relationship. It's still hard to let go of those children we had. But I can tell you that because of the way I worked my way of getting to her and keeping her under my wing, that's what helped, I think. And it felt really good. And we love each other so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you speak to so many things. I think the first thing is I think how we interact is not always representative at all about, what we normally connect to love. And, I remember Isabel saying this in one of the chais. So love can exist, but the expression of a relationship doesn't need to necessarily reflect that. We also
Mm,
come in, as you shared, with our own, yes, our own drivers, our own triggers
mm,
based on conditioning, history, and then what we've inherited, through our birth. And I think the next piece that at least I'm referring to, and also that you spoke to, is that even though the understanding from like a Vedic perspective, a Vedic science perspective, is that this is the karma that we have come into. That means these are the experiences that we are meant to experience in this life. And some of it isn't fun, some of it is painful. And my, I guess 2 cents, into this whole field is that I believe that there are karmas that can be changed. There are karmas that are more difficult to change, and there are some things that, exist. Like, if I'm born without a hand, I'm not going to be able to regeneratively regrow my hand. However, I can create other ways in which I can function and do things that I need to do. So I think that as I move on, I think this kind of stepping back a little bit, what it does is it creates space. It doesn't change the fact that we may be upset at something that happens, or like you said, a feeling of rejection. I mean, for me, that feeling of rejection only shows how much you do love, but then can we take a step back in that space that's created, which I will talk about, and use that space as a way of reflecting whether am I feeling rejected because of exactly what's going on here? And my daughter is showing her, a sense of independence and the fact that she wants to be autonomous and think about her own relationships. And maybe I can give her the space while, like you said, not disconnecting with her, but while kind of just being there for her. And maybe then, she can kind of take the wisdom that I'm giving her over a certain period of time. I think that that's what's important, that you allow for there to be a connection, yet think about whether the feeling of rejection comes from her or is it coming from something that's patterned and that's historical within us. That is
yeah.
huge because we walk up to a party and we say hi to someone and we think that they ignore us. Of course, we experience that, and we're entitled to experience that hurt. We're entitled to even notice that and even be upset about it. But the question is what are we really upset about? We're upset about being rejected. We're upset about being ignored, overlooked, not respected. So that's kind of a different thing. And I think stepping back a little bit creates that space for us to see it. And as you mentioned, all of this is so important because we bring all of this to us in every relationship that we have. And so why not try to transform these painful parts so that we can create joyous, happy lives. But thanks for sharing, Lynn. I have a tendency to go much, much later than all my chats. So it's a perfect segue into the fact that actually both people, for example, in your case, your daughter and you are trying to create not only connection, but a sense of safety. So if you think about the mother who feels disconnection is distance, but closeness feels more assuring. The daughter, on the other hand, then feels like that same closeness is pressure. You're telling me what to do. You're basically sharing with me that I don't know what I'm doing, which obviously doesn't feel good. And the space that one then creates for themselves, is a part of being able to emotionally regulate themselves. And I wanted to share. So this overlap, right, of these two fields doesn't always need to be good. We think of overlap as common denominator, but in this case, I would say this overlap is where the dissonance occurs. And it's just nice to be able to take a step back, and take a look at that. And when I see this, I just want to point out that this is where we are not necessarily aware when we immediately react, which we all do, right? But when we don't immediately react, we are coming from a place of unconscious relational karma. We're not really conscious of what's going on, or we're not aware. So this is again where agency, that means the choice that we can make, becomes possible. So if you think about it, then if we're going from not being aware to then being aware or conscious, right? I want to talk about how that awareness comes into being. So the first thing is, more than just the reaction that we have, what are the sensations? Let's get really, really visceral. Let's get embodied. What do we feel in our body? So like from the viewpoint of, for example, the daughter, she may feel tightness in her chest. And I think that's always what it does when you kind of connect it to your body. There is a sense of like the here and now, right? And not that we're connecting it to other things. So she feels a tightness in her chest. And immediately she's like, okay, like this feels like disconnection. This feels like pressure, depending upon, which perspective. And now a protective reaction. And again, I'm saying the same things, but in slightly different ways, only to show that by observing these various aspects doesn't solve the problem yet. It just creates a little bit of space where we're aware of where our reactions and our feelings, and our physical sensations come from. Right? So the protective reaction might be to move away, withdraw, defend, fight back or shut down. And then the last piece is just the awareness, where it's like, oh, wait a minute. And it's not, maybe not it's I am, but am I reacting through inherited conditioning? So it's just a question. And Lynn, you beautifully mentioned that, and we can go over it anytime, but you beautifully mentioned that you don't know what your chart says, but you know what you experience, you know what you feel.
Yeah,
And that's more than enough, right? Because we don't need a chart to tell us that, to be honest with you, right?
right.
We experience it ourselves. So in that moment where you're like, if you just step back and even ask yourself the question, why am I responding this way? Am I responding because I do feel rejected? Then it at least gives you just take one step back. You may not take 10, but you may take one to just slightly more clearly see things. And like you also said, awareness can also come by speaking to our friends, to our family, to our therapist, to, any
Mm,
practitioner, whoever it is. So it's just that we should actually be conscious of wanting to be aware of what's really going on, right?
right.
And then, so then I think it was, I mean, I think I mentioned it both times, but this is something that I came up with, which is the alchemy of agency, meaning that when we do exercise our ability of choice, our opportunity of choice, then we have the ability to alchemize the relationship. I only say this because I've done it myself and I've helped people do it as well. And I really do believe that it works. So we'll go through each one with relation to the mother and daughter, but it's really about recognizing and seeing whether like there is a pattern in a way that I behave, I respond, I interact, and then trying to understand maybe from a different perspective what that's showing, and then asking really, okay, so more than what I feel, what is this moment asking, me to be, asking me to do, asking me to think, or how, or what can I think, do, or feel that potentially is different, to learn from whatever is going on, or to see a different side of the person that I'm interacting with, whom I love, right? And in this particular, we're talking about parent-child, but you can copy paste it to any relationship. And then comes that conscious choice. I feel this way, but I'm not going to disconnect. I'm going to step back. I might offer and sprinkle a little bit of advice. Don't go with the 46-year-old, but I also am not going to, disconnect or put pressure because that will then potentially disconnect the relationship. Okay, so let's go. So for this mother and daughter pair, right? Now, if I'm operating or they're operating from a place without awareness, then naturally they're going to have these feelings of why are you shutting me out? Why are you putting pressure on me? And and really that the way that they're going to react is the way that they immediately feel. It is a reaction. So again, a part of all of this is for us not to actually react, to be able to take a step back and recognize, right, what's going on. So, okay, something's happening inside of me. I'm getting upset. My body feels activated. And suddenly, this just does not feel good. And it can be any emotion, anger, stress, anxiety, any of it. And then you're like, oh, okay, like I can just feel myself. And by the way, there's often times, and I know this because I felt it so many times where I am right here. I'm beginning to react automatically. And you're on the precipice. You have a choice of whether to react or to hold yourself back. And a lot of times we consciously make the choice to bulldoze ahead. I'm going to react, automatically because of just this feeling and I'm going to go with my emotion. But that doesn't always bode well all the time. And so I think it's important to get to this place. And so then before we jump off that, did you have something to say?
Yeah, just quickly,
Yes.
may I add to that is
Yes.
eating food. That's one of the reactions that we may have in our
Yes.
lives, right? That
Yes.
we go to the sweetness of life, right? Where do I go to comfort myself? And
Absolutely.
yeah, it's really a big thing in our world today.
Yes,
Mm.
and so you make a connection that's a perfect thing for me to say. From in Ayurveda, there are six tastes,
Oh,
and and one of the tastes, which is the sweet taste, is related to nurturing, related to love, related to comfort. So if you think about it, right, when you feel that that is missing, that part is somehow you're not able to connect to, then absolutely that's why we have a tendency to go towards those sweet tastes,
mm.
right? And so yeah, so very very fascinating. 1 minute as I yes, okay. So for the mom, her automatic interpretation of what's going on is that she's pulling away from me, I'm being rejected, I'm just maybe I'm a horrible parent, and maybe that daughter might have even said it. And you know what? This always happens. So, what would be the difference if we reframed? So, if we reframed, okay, wait a minute, what else is going on here? Am I reacting to what's exactly happening right now, or am I reacting to something else that, made me feel this way in the past? And this is really, I think, an important thing to always ask ourselves. Because oftentimes, I actually find myself, if I'm upset or agitated, the funniest thing is that sometimes I don't know why I'm agitated. So I will sit and ask myself the question, like, I know I'm feeling something. I know I'm agitated. That's where, like the body consciousness is important. And then, but am I reacting to what Lynn said? Or am I reacting to what my husband said? Or am I reacting to what a client said? And I think so, or is it that somebody said triggered me, but it had nothing to do with them? So that's important. And then from the next part, so after we recognize, it's important to then reframe, right? So again, the automatic things. This is from the daughter's perspective that she doesn't understand me. She's disappointed in me. I'm not enough. I'm not doing the right thing, and all she wants to do is see what like point out my mistakes. Um, and I think from a parental view, just by kind of taking a step back at this point, oftentimes children not always, but oftentimes children actually feel this. My parent doesn't understand me. She's always upset at me or disappointed in what I'm doing. She only points this out. And I think from a parent's perspective, that's not what they're trying to do, but it is how it comes across. And I think rather than feeling like the mother feeling upset that the daughter is taking it this way, learning to understand how she processes input. And I think that that then detaches and detangles one's reaction from a meaning on the understanding of the other person. Like, oh, she doesn't trust me. Oh, she doesn't recognize that I'm being her mom and I love her and I care about her. It's not actually about that. It's about the way that she processes input. And that's really something that's wired. And again, the same question that we had for the mom that we ask ourselves, but hopefully at some point, maybe my mom is reacting the way she is because of her conditioning. Likewise, I'm reacting the way that I am for my conditioning, and likewise, I'm reacting for my daughter because of my conditioning. So that's very important. And again, all of this creates that space. One kind of piece of or portion of distance between what we do and what we feel so that it allows us this ability to think about it in a different way. Okay. So the other thing is, what exactly are we here to learn? What exactly are our responses revealing to us? And so let's talk about beneath what's both of them. So it's not like, oh, why won't she talk to me? But think about, okay, I think for myself, I'm recognizing that when I don't connect to her in a particular way, I'm afraid that I'm going to lose this relationship. And that distance means loss for me. And I think that's such a huge thing. Whereas for the daughter, not about why is she putting so much pressure on me, but that, okay, I really need a bit of space. Like I know that this is the way I process things. And this is the way I feel when I'm immediately asked a question or put in a certain spot. And I think what's missing really at this point, and it comes really in the next slide, is how we respond. And, oftentimes it's communication, right? But we communicate from our feelings rather than our knowing or our understanding. And I think that's where the space, more than anything should be created. So in terms of response, we have two types, an automatic response and then the one where that space is created and we can give a more conscious one. So in this case, rather than, kind of what definitely will feel like attacking to the daughter, saying, why don't you talk to me anymore? And the daughter is like, why do we always have to talk about this? I think it can be like, this is just the way I feel when I disconnect. Because I think that when you share that and it is not taken as something that someone else did, something melts in the other person. They themselves have been given the ability to open themselves to be able to see, oh, wow, like, of course, like, oh, I can understand. And then it starts the conversation. And then, I want to give you space while still letting you know that I'm here, which is what the mother could share. And then the daughter sharing that she does need a little space, but she is certainly not pushing the mom away. So all of this sounds somewhat simple, but what I have found a lot of people feel is that, all right, now I know maybe that this is the way that I react to things, or this is the way she reacts to things. Does that mean that I need to second guess every single thing I'm thinking? I can't trust what I'm feeling. I can't trust what I'm doing. If someone hurts me, do I just have to let them do that? And is everything conditioning? And so I just have it all just kind of coalesces into that. And I would say that the answer is certainly not. And I think that what is important is that the awareness, I think in all of this creates it does create a little bit of unsettling, but it creates just a bit of agitation where we can say, ooh, like, but there is something more. And I also want to talk about something else, where is that we are not dismissing what is going on. So that means that when something happens, we have an interaction with somebody, or the relational fields, have this kind of dissonance. That activation is real, and that's what we're meant to actually feel. That's the karma. That's the overlapping of that karma. And sometimes, what we feel like, we're sad, we're upset, we're hurt. That suffering is real. So I am not at all dismissing any of that. However, I think that what is important to understand is that when we take a step back and that we understand, there is a way to create discernment that so let me say it this way. It is imperative that we create discernment in understanding. So, for example, the postman that slanders my name or, throws profanities my way, that person isn't as important to me as my mother or certain or as my daughter or or certain relationships. So first we have to know that we have to be discerning on where we can bring this understanding everywhere, but where we make the changes are the fact that whether a relationship is important to us, and that is a choice that we have to make. So we have that choice as well. And if it is, and it feels so difficult to have, even though it is important to us, then I think it is worth it to begin to cultivate this awareness. Because after all, if I were to again go back to the Vedic sciences, and if you can think about it in that way or ascribe to it, then these are the lessons that we have to learn. And when we do learn them, that dissonance will transform. It's just part and parcel. But now, what we learn from the relationships that matter to us are that in many ways, and in all ways, all the relationships that we have, can benefit from this kind of thinking. And so the thing that we need to be aware of is that we don't always respond to things from what happened in the present moment, but that there is an inherited emotional conditioning and a way that we attach meaning to certain things based on what our nervous system and our experiences have shown us. And we have created that relational pattern or I guess, how do I say it, strengthen that relational pattern in certain ways. And so if we choose, we can absolutely change that. And so I was just showing here how the same pattern exists across all of these different, ways, because so many people can experience that push pull in with respect to expectations or people making certain efforts or that you have to prove yourself in a certain way or that someone doesn't understand. And so when we are able to utilize this ability to understand, create with that awareness, and then take a step back and choose a different way of responding based on kind of what we can see or an understanding of what could possibly be there, we can, in fact, transform relationships. And so I can tell you that there certainly comes a relief from that. And I also wanted to share just a few things, just a quick a couple of slides, and then we can have a discussion. So as just to kind of recap about what we're talking about, we're born into certain circumstances, right? And then through that birth, here we're focusing on the relational ways, particularly parent-child, that comes through these particular charts in Jyotish. That helps us understand the ancestral lineage and what we inherit, and then our relational tone. And again, this is moving a little bit into technicalities, but there are so many different ways in which this inheritance will mirror in our lives. And awareness then reveals the why of what we experience. And so when we have that misunderstanding or pain, we can understand that, okay, this is going on because of an inherited responsibility and maybe something that I need to learn. But that awareness in me can help me understand and maybe change the way I respond rather than emotionally and have that conscious response. And then again, not repeat patterns across the different relationships that I have. And so, what I would like to urge all of you to do, right, is to really be able to know yourself. That's what I always say. If you know yourself, you can create change. So, what behaviors feel like care to you? What behaviors feel like pressure? And how does your nervous system respond to different things? And how do you then replenish yourself with safety? So what do you do? And these are just two examples, whether it be move toward connection or move toward distance. And there's so many different combinations and possibilities. But it's important to understand how we react to things. And again, this does not mean that you walk away or that I walk away from this presentation or knowing this that we never get activated. We're human. We are going to get activated, right? But what it does mean is that if you're aware, over time, you can work on this. I want to end with one thing, and that is that, like, just because we have a certain conditioning and a way of being, we absolutely can change that. And we can consciously behave in a different way in which we really can then have a relationship that, on many levels, can satisfy both people. And both people, well, of course, if both people consciously participate. But I can tell you from personal experience that when you begin to react differently to these kind of inherited or seen patterns that you have. Oh, I always fight with my mom like this, or oh, I always fight with my daughter like this. Then when you change, the energy of that relationship changes. And so naturally, the other person sitting opposite you will eventually, over time, have to change. So a big topic and a lot of you shared, but I would love to open it up for discussions about particular issues that you may face or you struggle with this or just questions in general.
Trying to get my connection properly. Yeah, it's so fascinating. In fact, I've got Paling on the phone listening. It's so wonderful. I want her to, both of us to listen to this conversation again because, it's and you know it happens. You do it with your partners, you do it with colleagues at work. And I don't do it as often as I should. Step back before I open my mouth. I am that knee-jerk reaction person, and it's very, very important to pay attention to the words people use with you, because the words they use trigger us, right? And especially if we've had history, like my history, it's so to be more aware of that is going to be so helpful, right?
Yes, and I think the onus, though, I will say the onus is on us to recognize how we are. And it's not about like saying that being sensitive is wrong. No. But if a certain sensitivity causes us pain, then, rather than waiting for some other person to solve that problem for us or to make it better in order for us to feel good, you may be waiting. That's like that's a moving train that we don't know, when it's going to stop or, and when it's going to let us on. So I think that it's important to be like, okay, yes, I react different. I have a knee-jerk reaction, but maybe I can start to say, well, what they say, because, a lot of times I say the cup is on the table, to my husband. If I don't give a specific location of that cup, he won't find it, right? And so, I mean, and of course, these are just simple, trivial problems, or funny situations, but each person, needs a different thing. So rather than I can make the choice of constantly getting upset because I have to describe the exact location of that cup, or I can just say, it's right next to the glasses that is red, that is connected to the, well, to the thread. But I think that we have to, I think it's important that we recognize that we have a stake in our own happiness and that happiness should be paramount to our experience living th- because it influences us just so very much.
Happy living.
Co- Yeah, I would say content living. And because,
Okay.
and contentment can then be transformed into happiness.
Mm,
I think my mom is on the call, which I just so love that she's here supporting me, and she's done
yeah.
that every other chai. But I remember the other day she had said something to me like, I'm suffering from a rash on my face, and she said something like, oh, something about taking care of it, don't touch it or don't do something. And I can tell you that I actually I was like, oh yes, thank you. But I will tell you the younger me. and maybe she she can tell you as well, would have fought back because I could very much relate to. I would feel like, wait a minute, like she doesn't think I know how to take care of my own face. I've been living with it for 50 years. I should know. But that's the thing. So I think that, as you make an effort to become aware of the fact that another person is not going to behave the way you do. They will behave different. What they do, what they think, what they feel means something different to them. And if you take the time to understand that, then you can make a conscious choice whether or not to engage. That's the first thing, because we all have a right to do that. And eventually, over time, it's not fake. You will realize, oh, that person just loves me and cares about me and sharing information, and I can just happily accept it and then move on with my life.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Viji, I just have a question. When thinking about different relationships in my life with parents, with like my pets, with friends, with other people, I can see different patterns in different situations.
Yeah.
And is that when like the planetary influences might be involved of like the different D12 and the different D7, the different flavors and the different karmas? Um, is that where like that complexity comes into where you might be reacting in different ways in different relationships?
Yes, that is the beauty. That is the level of awareness that Jyotish brings. It can be so exact and zoomed in, and then also kind of give you a global perspective. We can think something in one way, but we can feel something in a different way, right? And those differences are also revealed, yes, through the different planets. There's many, many layers to it. And that's why this is such a difficult topic to talk about because there's so much interest in wanting to learn and understand, but it's not an easy map to read at all by any means. And so that's why I always bring it back to Jyotish and Ayurveda share very scientific, specific reasoning so that you can share this is why it's happening. But you don't need that in order to know it's happening because you experience it and you think about it. And I guess what I would say, maybe in one or two sentences, is that yes, just being aware of how we respond to our pets, to our partners, to our parents, to our colleagues, and just being aware of it. If you're aware of it, like this, that really bothered me. I don't like this. This is the way I feel. And I think it's about training. So you're not going to learn it overnight. It's not going to happen over the month. But as you train yourself slowly to see the experience differently, then you will experience the experience differently, and then you'll have a different reaction to it. So that takes time. And I think that's the process that people kind of give up on because it's hard and they have to do it. But, I would argue, what is harder? Is it harder to be upset and disappointed and angry and, anxious all the time? Or is it worth the effort to learn this and create better experiences? And some of those better experiences may be that is not something that I want to do. And that to protect my own creative field, which is important, for example, when I want to get pregnant or when I am pregnant, I need to protect my space and my baby space that's growing inside of me and that is affected by that. I'm going to make the decision. Yes, it's going to be difficult. Maybe the person will or will not understand, but that's where we have to prioritize that as certain things. And maybe we communicate it. And when we communicate it, maybe that person isn't aware and they take it personally. It's not like we learn this and then life is perfect, but we have to learn to accept that because there's a hierarchy of importance that different things play in our lives. That's what I would say. And eventually, over time, then I think people, if you decide to cultivate that understanding with the other person who you care about, but doesn't seem to understand, then hopefully that change, will happen. I've seen it. I've seen it personally where, people who, and I can just give this quick example. I had a lady who had repeated miscarriages, repeated. And she had a first baby, but then after that, each subsequent pregnancy became a miscarriage. So when she came to me I said, okay, before you get pregnant again, let's assess why you're having these miscarriages. And I concluded that there was an extensive amount of heat that was in her body. because heat in, let's say, the mind, you're stressed or you're worried about something, heat in the mind can be effusive to different parts of your body. It's not just, it just stays in one part. So heat in the reproductive organs didn't allow the baby to stay there. And so we identified all the different parts. And one of the parts was that her parents were controlling like her life, and that she was so scared to share with them anything because they would, I mean, this is her experience. I haven't talked to the parents, but they would share, they would say, oh, you're not doing this right. You have to do this, you have to do this. And so, what she decided to do and what I shared with her, because he said, well, if you want to get pregnant and keep that baby, like we need to create a balanced environment, more coolness rather than heat. And so when she did that, part of that was to draw boundaries with her parents. And she got pregnant. She stayed pregnant, and she delivered her baby, probably by Lynn here. And but what ended up happening was that then they shared, at a certain point where she was able to control that environment in her body, she shared with her parents. And the fact that she drew boundaries but didn't disconnect from them actually made them begin to understand her. And so they actually established a much more healthier relationship. So this is where, maybe an initial reaction of how can you do that? How can you withdraw from me? Still didn't disconnect, because I told her, don't disconnect. You don't need to disconnect the relationship in order to, create space for yourself. It's just a switch in the way that you think about it. But yeah, so it does absolutely have an impact. And so I decided to do these 3 sets of talks for that reason, because so many people come where they're in a situation and all of these things absolutely influence it.
I have a question, Viji.
Yeah.
In the example that you walked us through of the mother and the daughter, where is the line between the daughter giving the mother the reassurance or validation versus trying to actively manage the mother's emotions?
Yeah, well, I think my immediate response is that it is not our job to manage another person's emotions. It's not. We think it is. We feel empathy, we feel love, we feel care, we feel sadness, we feel the desire to do that. But we can't. We can't take that on, because then you're living 2 people's lives. It's already hard enough to live one. So it's our choice, but it is okay to say, I need this space, or I love you, I need the space. And you don't have to say the words, I love you and I need the space. There are various ways in which you can say exactly that, but in different ways. And you can be creative depending upon the relationship or the language that you have. But, the essence is, I'm going to stay connected to you. However, I will draw these boundaries so that I share what I need to feel safe. It's not reflective of how I feel about you, or it's not reflective of you, but this is what I need. And so you can say, there's a way of saying like, hey, stop bothering me. Like, just manage, like, this is the way I am. This is the way I feel. And, like, I'm not here to manage your emotions. That's not how I would say it, because that's obviously going to feel horrible to the other person. But if you stay in your own truth, then that's the best that you can do. And that's why I'm not talking about what the mother necessarily feels. However, if you don't disconnect from the mother, then she doesn't feel that you're disconnecting. She may initially feel a little bit confused. She said something and then she's still connecting with me. Oh, well, maybe she's not upset with me. Maybe we are still close. Maybe, oh, she does actually need space. So I think that, allowing a person to go through that process allows them to transform, as opportunity to transform as well.
Okay. Thank you, Viji.
You're welcome.
Viji, what stands out to me is that it's not like we're not victims of like our relationships with anybody, and that we always have agency. And at least my brain, I think, is trying so often to just have 2 categories, like this is what I need and this feels good, and this is what I don't need, it doesn't feel good. And so it's more like a black and white, and maybe right and wrong. And now this just opens so much space to like to see, just there's so many more layers to it. And it's not it's not about chasing, this is what is good for me, I want more of this. This is what's not good for me, I want to avoid it. But it's just to kind of be, listen, be and see, or yeah, just be curious and experience it, rather just like for myself putting it in a category of, okay, I feel seen, I feel not seen, I feel understood, I feel not understood, and that just opens so much space for, I guess, yeah, healing in relationships. And
Yeah. I love the B and C is enough. It doesn't need to be more than just those two words. But the biggest thing is that when we identify that I need to be seen, then I think that we can create ways of seeing ourselves. And when we do that, then that need doesn't exist. And you will be so surprised because then it will, like, it will happen. See, because you don't look into like, hey, how come you're not paying attention to me? How come you're not seeing me? How come you're not, like recognizing me? But when you and you notice that, or it happens, I think mostly because like you said, we're chasing it. And I oftentimes find also like when you don't chase it, is when then things start to transform, because first of all then you create it for yourself, so you're content and you have that feeling of being seen because you don't need to be seen by any other person but yourself. That quality of you being full is then recognized by others, and then actually they begin to show what you originally wanted. I feel like this helps in every aspect. I was talking about my rash yesterday. I had a conversation with somebody, and they had shared with me, oh, these kind of things, you just have to accept it. It's funny. This is what they said. You just have to accept it. It may go in a day, it may go in a month, it may go in a year. Just have to accept it. And I was like, I'm just going to accept it. And then I woke up this morning, I'm not lying to you. I woke up this morning and the rash was less. You may not be able to see it on the screen, but anyways, it's less. And so I almost feel like this, it's the energetics of nature that in all different ways this philosophy works. Yes.
No, I was just going to add that throughout my life, there's no doubt we come across people and they cross our paths, and we think, why am I connecting with this person? And then all of a sudden it comes to light, or we read something and we think, oh wow, I've never read that before, but what do I need that for? It's so, life is really made for us to just follow a path that's unseen, really.
Yes.
Right? And you'll be guided.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for joining. The next Chai with Viji is going to be the second Sunday of July, and it's going to be a lot more lighter because I will be sharing my travels that I'll be going to Nepal in about 9 days, and it's a pilgrimage of sorts. It's very like sacred sites in the Himalayas. I'll be going to a place called Gosai Kunda, which you can look up. I'll be going to a place called Mount Kailash, where I will circumambulate the mountain. And then I will also be going to Everest Base Camp. So hopefully I'll survive all of that. I always make that joke, but I would love to share, my experience, my learnings, and, maybe any connections to, like Lynn said, life and the unseen path that we are all meant to and do travel. But yeah, I would love for you to join me, and maybe one day you guys would take that journey as well. So happy Sunday, and I will see you guys next time. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Viji.
You're welcome.